Hello, everybody. It's good to see all of your faces. My name is Kate Greenberg. I'll be introducing our next speakers. I am the Western Program Director with the National Young Farmers Coalition. On my non-working hours, I serve as the chair of the board for the Quivira Coalition, and it's an honor to be serving you all in that capacity, and especially here at our annual conference with new partners this year. So today I have the honor of introducing our next speakers, Kathy Ruhf and Jennie Stevens. Kathy Ruhf has worked in agricultural land access, tenure, and transfer for over 30 years. Over this time, she has focused on educating and advocating for beginning farmers in New England and beyond. Kathy co-directed the New England Small Farm Institute for 17 years. Since 2004, she has held several positions at Land for Good, including as executive director. She has served on and chaired the USDA Advisory Committee on Beginning Farmers and Ranchers, and through Land for Good has advised and presented on land access and transfer nationally. Kathy holds a master's in administration and an MS in natural resource management and lives in Western Massachusetts. So please give a round of applause for Kathy. And then I'll introduce. Yep. And then I will also introduce Jennie so I can leave the stage. So Jennie Stevens has served as executive director of the Center for Heirs Property Preservation since its inception in 2005. She has worked for more than 25 years in the nonprofit field and held a number of positions across organizations. Most recently, Jennie had the pleasure of being a speaker at TEDx Charleston, where you can see her talk titled, "Heirs Discover Money Does Grow on Trees." She's also been selected as a 2018 Bally Fellow and has joined 24 other leaders around North America who are building healthy and equitable rural economies. Jennie received a bachelor's degree in business administration from the College of Charleston, a master's degree in public administration from University of Charleston and University of South Carolina, and a PhD in organizational leadership from Regent University in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Please welcome Jennie. And you're first. So up first we have Kathy, and then we will hand it off to Jennie and have a Q&A and time for questions.
Mike. Okay, are we good to go? Can you hear me? No. Is it on? All right. We'll make it work. Good afternoon. This is an amazing crowd, an amazing gathering. I'm really honored to be here all the way from Massachusetts, and I really appreciate the invitation, and special thanks to the amazing Sarah Wenzel Fisher for getting me here. As was mentioned, I'm going to talk about how land access, secure tenure, and intergenerational transfer are essential to a full realization of a regenerative agriculture in the U.S. As was mentioned, I've worked in the nonprofit sector for over 3 decades on these issues. And like the stories you've heard today from Deborah, from Will, from Jonathan, I've sat at many kitchen tables and heard stories that are both heartwarming and heartbreaking. So I have an ongoing passion for these issues around land tenure and beginning farmers as well, and I'm going to share with you a little bit of my thinking and the thinking of my organization, Land for Good. I co-founded Land for Good about 14 years ago, and we started focusing on farm succession and transfer because in our neck of the woods we saw that there was really a huge dearth in support for that critical aspect of the farming cycle. Later on, we added working with non-farming landowners and then also with beginning farmers, and then really rounded out the work that we do, which I will explain to you in a little bit more. I know that there's a lot of ranching out here, and so if I just say farmers, I mean farmers and ranchers, and if I say farm, I mean farms and ranches as well. Our direct service is focused in New England and the 6 New England states, and you know, our big farms are around 400 acres or more, and with the exception of Maine, perhaps. And so scale might be different, types of commodities and crops and farming systems might be different, but the issues, especially around land access, tenure, and transfer, are really the same. You've heard many takes on what a regenerative agriculture means. I love words, and so I like to look them up. Regeneration means regrown, reformed, or reborn, renewal or revival, to improve a place or system, to bring new and more vigorous life to an area, industry, or institution, to develop and improve, to make more active and successful. So, in my mind, you cannot have a regenerative agriculture without regenerating farmers and ranchers. So in this context, regeneration is all about how farmers and ranchers start, sustain, and renew their operations, how they steward their land now and for future generations. It is about farming renewal, opportunity, entry, legacy, exit, and it is about land tenure as a sustainable relationship among the owner and the user, if they're not one and the same, and the land itself, under the producer's care and over time. To me, a regenerative agriculture depends on viable entry, equitable and secure tenure, and successful exit and transfer. So I argue that no issue is more important to the future of your agriculture and to U.S. agriculture in general than who will be the next generation of producers and land stewards. As one of those definitions suggests, regeneration is about improving a system, and you've talked all day about improving the natural resource system. At Land for Good, we also have a systems perspective, and we believe that improvement requires direct assistance to farmers and ranchers, and also changing the conditions under which farmers access and transfer land, looking at the whole system. A systems perspective helps us understand the relationship between entry and exit, between agricultural practices and land tenure, and among the financial, legal, and social dimensions of land transactions. Also among the key stakeholders, the producers, the landowners, the service providers, the policymakers, and the members of the community. More and more food system people, as some of the questions came up just now, are connecting the dots. And we like to say that food security requires farmer security, and farmer security and rancher security mean land security. Agricultural land tenure issues are not new. Equitable partition of land is the necessary basis of all self-sustaining agriculture, stated Liberty Hyde Bailey, the father of American horticulture, in 1909. Tenure means to hold. Our history is fraught with agrarian tenure challenges: sharecropping, Native American and African American land dispossession, discriminatory attitudes and structural biases, land depletion, development, and conversion. Data shows increasing inequality and concentration in agricultural wealth and land ownership. Who owns the land matters. You all know that. Equitable division of rights and responsibilities matters. And when I say land, I also mean associated rights, such as water, mineral, and now wind and solar. They're as important and as fraught as the land rights issue. Throughout U.S. history and today, there's no consensus around land tenure values and goals. Despite Jefferson's ideal of the yeoman landowner, about half of U.S. producers rent some or all of the land that they farm or ranch. For some, land ownership is paramount, and you'll see where you fall in your really personal and family values. Land ownership is paramount, a passionately held value and desire, a source and symbol of power, a profound legacy. And we heard that again from the generation to generation to generation. For others, land is a working asset. Ownership is not really that important. And for some, private property is itself inconsistent with their personal values. They seek alternatives to our culture's dominant property ownership patterns. Whatever one's personal orientations toward agrarian land tenure, the facts are stark. We have an aging farmer population with 70% of U.S. farmland changing hands in the next 2 decades. So a question for you, how many people here are over the age of 50? Look at that. Okay. Land costs are escalating beyond the reach of most new farmers and cannot be paid for by farming. The USDA definition of a new farmer or rancher is anyone that's farmed for 10 years or less. How many people in this room count as a new farmer or rancher? Okay, so look at that. Over 80% of farm landlords in the private sector are not farmers. So there's an increasing disconnect between who owns the land and who's farming it. How many people in here are land owners? Okay, look at that. Land access has been determined to be the top issue or one of the top issues for beginning farmers and ranchers in various studies. Traditional methods of farm transfer, farm and ranch transfer, such as to the eldest son, are no longer operative or sufficient. 90% of retiring farmers do not have an exit strategy, and 2/3 in a study in Iowa, a heavy farm state, 2/3 of those farmers do not have an identified successor. So we have a lot of work to do, and the need is urgent. Regeneration in land tenure requires new approaches, applications, stakeholders, and partners. And while different regions have their unique takes on these issues, as I said, the fundamental parameters are the same. So, some practicalities. Who are these farm seekers? Next generation farmers and ranchers are increasingly diverse. And as we know from regeneration theories, diversity is essential for resilience. More and more farmers and ranchers are coming from non-farm backgrounds. Many of them are older. In fact, we crunched some of the US Census data for the 6 New England states and found that in every state, the majority of beginning farmers, again by that definition, are over the age of 45. I don't know what it is here, but it would be interesting to find that out. Farmers are coming from and looking to farm in urban and peri-urban and highly developing areas. They are immigrants, refugees, farm workers. They are women, veterans, Native Americans, Hispanic, African American, and next generation or next and next and next generation family farmers. They, or you, beginning farmers and ranchers, may have different goals and values about farm ownership, debt, quality of life, and community, and so where and how you farm and live matters. Therefore, your land access needs are equally diverse as to location, scale, type of farming, commodity, farming practices, housing, and community. And in fact, as Jonathan pointed out, and many of you might have that experience as well, next generation is often looking to farm differently or quite differently than the generation before them, whether they're going on to their family's farm or ranch or someone else's. And I know that that's created a lot of tension in many of the farm families that I work with. So these new farmers need information about their options. They need support to build readiness, to assess their choices. What are their tenure options? What's feasible? Are they financially ready to make prudent choices? How do they assess a property? We just put out a new farm methods access guide that operates on a framework essentially of 3 choices around land tenure. You can own the land as one choice, as a sole owner, shared ownership models, which are increasingly of interest to beginning farmers and other farmers as well, or around divided interests, such as peeling off the development rights or other kinds of rights. So sole ownership, shared ownership, and divided ownership as one. You can hope to own a piece of property in the future, so a path to ownership through lease to own, land contracts, or gradual transfers through a family or non-family transition in a business entity. Or you cannot own. And as I said, tenancy is either out of necessity or choice for many farmers and ranchers through leasing of various sorts, and we do a lot of work on leasing and all kinds of leases and what constitutes a good lease and so on, or other non-ownership agreements. So within this framework, land needs to be available, appropriate, affordable, secure, equitable, and findable. So for senior producers, transfers must be timely, thought through, secure also, equitable also, and feasible. And one of the biggest challenges is that farmers, like the rest of us perhaps, are really reluctant to face some of these issues around death, end of career, loss of meaning, loss of control. So we do a lot of avoiding, and farmers and ranchers that we've surveyed understand the value of farm succession planning and yet find it really hard to step up. So even though they might come to a workshop, it's really hard to keep the momentum going. And succession planning, as those of you who have contemplated it or engaged it, really is a lengthy and very complex process. It can take months, maybe a couple of years, and the actual transfer can take a decade or more. One of the biggest challenges in succession planning is starting the plan, and the second biggest challenge is completing the plan. And within that, the soft issues are the hard issues. And Jonathan alluded to that a little bit. Family dynamics, communications, visioning, values, goal setting, the transfer of management and control. These are really the hard issues, and there aren't nearly enough people who can support families to work that through. Farmers who are in transition need a team. It's not enough to go to an attorney and say, draw me up a will. You need financial advice, you need legal advice, and you need consultation on various specialties. So it takes a team, and in almost every region, there's not enough of those team members available to help farmers and ranchers through the succession planning process. It's particularly fraught when there isn't a family successor, although I have heard farmers and ranchers say when they do have a family successor, they wished that they didn't, and those who don't wish that they did. So, maybe the grass is greener. In either case, grooming that successor and transferring management and income and assets is a real challenge. So for those of you who are thinking about it, I applaud you and I encourage you to keep at it. So what about for non-farming landowners, or what USDA calls non-operator landowners, NOLOs? There are, your region contains a lot of public land, and maybe many of you lease public land. So we're talking about public land, private land, local land. I understand the county here has acquired some land and is training farmers to farm on county land. So we really need to expand our thinking about who those landowners are and how to get them into the equation. Non-farming landowners are increasingly removed from the land, either by geography or by generation. And so getting them re-engaged in a partnership with the land user and with the land to share the risk and the reward, especially around the kind of farming and ranching that you all do, is absolutely essential. And there's not nearly enough support for non-farming landowners as well. What can service providers do? How many of you here are service providers of various sorts? Okay, so not so many. We need to engage service providers, and everybody from subject experts who can go deeply into helping farm seekers and transitioning farmers, to all the other agency personnel, conservation organizations, lenders, investors, a whole bunch of other stakeholders that need to be part of the solution. What can communities do? I think that the local food movement is a real opportunity for us to help communities connect the dots. Local land use policy, regional land use, all fits into the equation of trying to put land tenure onto the map. We need to engage new partners, including investors, funders, agencies, policymakers, researchers, conservation organizations, and even people from the non-agricultural sector. We draw a lot from family business specialties to look at how they talk about transferring family businesses. Service providers can hold and host workshops, introduce transition planning in their work. And by the way, one of the things that we really like to encourage is for farmers and ranchers to think about transition planning throughout the business life cycle. It doesn't help to think about it when you're 80 years old. You run out of choices and options. Transitions happen, either planned or unplanned transitions, throughout that business life cycle. And we have a little chart that says all of that, mentions all the things that a farmer and rancher can do throughout the business life cycle to prepare so that when you get to the point where you're actually looking at transition, you've lined up a lot of ducks already. So we have a huge opportunity to revitalize our agriculture with new entrepreneurs, new arrangements, and new innovative practices. Regenerative agriculture requires renewal and rededication, and how we think about land access, tenure, and transfer. Land for Good is eager to work with and learn from you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm a walker, so I'm going to turn this mic off. Can you still hear me? All right. I must confess that I'm not a rancher. Have never been on a ranch. Probably will go on a ranch, but I haven't thus far. My name is Jennie Stevens, and I have the pleasure of serving as Executive Director of the Center for Heirs Property Preservation. How many of you know what heirs property is? Show of hands. Wow, I have one hand, two. Well, my plain colleague over there, we got to talk to each other, so that's why he knows. But I have one hand in the audience. So you might ask the question, so Jennie, if you're not a rancher, why are you here? Someone asked me over lunch, was I a rancher? Was I a farmer? And my response is, no, I'm a technical service provider. So heirs property is a form of land ownership. If you want to think about it, so heirs property comes about because someone died without a will, and their loved ones did not probate their estate within time allotted by the state law. Therefore, they end up owning it jointly. If you want to think about it, it's like shares in a corporation. They don't own a particular piece of the land, they own shares. And what one member does can upset the ownership status for the remaining members. Because that one member can decide, I don't like my family anymore, and I know none of you have any family issues, so I won't ask about that. And they sell their share. And the newest family member who bought them out may not want to keep it that way. So heirs property makes it difficult to own land, to manage land, and to even maximize its use. So in my neck of the woods, people often assume that heirs property owners are African American. Yeah, that's the case a little bit. But if you move on up to the Appalachian area, the skin tone of the landowner might change, but it's the same issue. And if you move on to land that's owned by our Native American community, they may not call it heirs property, they may call it fractionated land. Or even if you go down to Texas where the colonials are. So there are a different variety of people who are owning heirs property. So why does this form of land ownership also make it difficult to access land? So our landowners have land, but the problem is they really can't use it. Can you imagine getting input from 20 people to decide what you'd like to do with your land? What about 100? What about 200? Yeah, there you go. The gentleman in the audience said, forget it. And oftentimes that's what some people have decided, forget it. I haven't seen that branch of the family in so long, I'm not even gonna go there. So just to give you a little context about where the center works, we are in South Carolina and we're along the coast. So if you look at that to your left, the blue area on the map, well, our Congressman Clyburn, he's designated that the I-95 corridor, or is Interstate 95, where it's been proven for several years people have lived in poverty. But these people are often land rich and cash poor. So what we do at the center is we're providing a way in which these landowners can maximize the use of their land. Did you also know that people who own heirs property can't get a mortgage? So if the bank wants to foreclose, are they going to go around and get, deliver the notice to 100 folk? I don't think so. Or to access USDA programs. So how is it, so how can you, if you can't access the potential in your land, then yes, you may have the land, but literally it's like it's behind a glass box, it's enclosed, and you really can't do anything with it. Show of hands, how many of you have wills? That's about like that average on the screen. It says 50% of Americans have wills. That's the one way that heirs property results. In my neck of the woods, some people think that if they have a will drafted, they're going to die. Well, guess what? You're going to die anyway. But the point is, die prepared, correct? So you won't have Junior, who we know who does not have the best intentions, who's now owning your land and doing things with it that you don't want to happen. So here is our empowerment philosophy at the center. We have landowners who do not recognize the value of what they own. So our job is to help them have that aha moment. They see the fact that, oh, this land has been passed down from Big Mama for several years, and we've been able to hold on to it. But they really don't see, how can this property help me move out of poverty? Or how can this property help me build generational wealth for my family? So we're really big on that aha moment. Then the next thing is the toolbox. You've got to have some tools. Now you may need a hammer, may need a saw, may need a tape measure, but you've got to have some tools. And for us at the center, those two tools that we primarily use are through legal services and forestry services. Because in hopes that once people understand what they own, which you can also translate to your farmers or your family's farms, that you want to pass it down, but the next generation may not recognize what it is that you're passing to them, therefore they're not going to appreciate it. And then making sure you're connecting with the tools. Our partners consist of our state Natural Resource Conservation Service. We're working with the Farm Service or agency. We're also working with the Forest Service. We're working with our State Forestry Commission, Land Trust, because the point we recognize at our organization is we can't do it all by ourselves. So those are some of those tools to which Catherine was referring to. And of course, ultimately, we want people to be able to put some money in a piggy bank. Save it. Yes, you may take care of some things right now, but we also want you to think about the generations behind you. So let me tell you a little bit about our philosophy strategies. There are three of them, 3 buckets: prevention, resolution, and land utilization. That prevention is about preventing the growth of heirs property and preventing the loss of heirs property. First activity that we do is we want to make sure that landowners are informed. We're not making decisions for them. They get to make the decisions for themselves, but we want them to be informed. Legal advice and counsel. The joke is, because we're a nonprofit, we're a 501c3 organization, so that means I've got to raise money. Not a lot of folk want to pay for an attorney's salary. However, that is the tool that's needed. And we have that on our staff. The drafting of wills, we're doing that. We actually enlist the assistance of for-profit attorneys in the community. We go out to community centers, churches, schools, you name it, wherever the people are. And we're drafting wills on site. They're simple wills. So if your estate is pretty big, then we're not the right tool for you. Probating estates. And I forgot to give my little speech at the beginning that says, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not providing you with legal advice. So just really giving you an overview of what we do at the center. So probate just basically means you're taking the asset out of the name of the deceased individual and putting it into the name of the living. Some families, because everyone knows that you have to have, or there should be some kind of funeral or memorial when someone dies, correct? But what do you do after that? It's about being prepared in advance. And we spend an awful lot of time making sure landowners, and I'll get to where our farmers or forestry people fall in there in a minute, but initially we started out just dealing with landowners, period. Because we knew it's an asset. It's an asset that if not passed down properly, could be lost. Typically, our attorneys are seeing about 300 folk. They're providing advice and counsel to about 300 folk on a year, on 300 on an average on a year. And those people, when you look at the tax assessed value of their land, it's about $34 million. That is not something to sneeze at. Some of that land now, and I must admit, we live in Charleston, which is a metropolitan area. So some of those folk may actually literally own a lot, but that lot could be $400,000 if it's in downtown Charleston. So prevention, we're big. We're big on making sure that heirs property doesn't grow and it doesn't continue to happen. Then resolution. It's past that 10-year period that's allotted by our state to resolve heirs property on your own. To probate your loved one's estate. Therefore, you must have an attorney. Legal education, once again, is key. People need to understand what it means to own heirs property and how to resolve it. The direct legal services. There are two things that are key to resolving heirs property. One of those is knowing the family tree, the heirs of the person who's deceased. But the second thing, that's hard too, but the second thing I believe is even harder, to which Kathy referred earlier, is family agreement. Now, it may be okay if it's one generation. You might have a spouse and the children. Might be okay. But can you imagine when it's 3-4 generations? You may not even know the people that you're going to have to make a business decision with, how difficult that can be. And the fact that 9 times out of 10, what's been proven, it's a family dynamic that's never been addressed. Has nothing to do with the land. But we can assure you, until you address that family dynamic, you're not going to talk about the land. And then once again, we're making sure people are drafting wills. So before I get to my forestry piece, here is one of our heirs property owners. You see the lady at the bottom right? Just out of curiosity, someone throw me out what you think her age is. How much? Well, not the top, the bottom. When we started, her name is Ursel Chillis. When we started working on her case, she was in her 90s. Took us like 6 years to finish it. And she is now, and we finished it about when she was 96. She's now 104. But what Ms. Chillis recognized, that it was never too late to start the process. No, you shouldn't wait till you're that old to start talking about succession planning, because probably most of us aren't going to make it there anyway. But the point to that, though, is I use her as our poster child. It's never too late to start. So our last piece, the land utilization. We work with tree farmers. Our individuals have had dormant land. As I said earlier, I'm in the South. Farming is not sexy for African Americans in the South because of history. Just saying. But the issue of doing sustainable forestry, people could wrap their arms around. And once we're providing the education and letting them know what their opportunities are, we're in the southern district of the U.S. Forest Service, which is considered the wood basket of the U.S. $231 billion is the industry in that southern district. $21 billion is the forestry industry in South Carolina. So here it is, we have landowners who literally have what they need to move themselves out of poverty, but because they don't understand the value and don't have the tools, it's sitting there. So we're providing education, we're providing the forestry technical assistance, we're connecting them to cost share programs, and those of you, if you know, USDA hasn't always had a great relationship with African Americans. Just saying. And then once again, we still are stressing that point about drafting wills. So what does this mean for you? And why did Sarah, my colleague in the Bali program, ask me to come here? So what can you do? Educate. That's the first thing you can do, is make people aware of how important it is to have a will, have a succession plan, to know what it is. What does it entail? To advocate. Are you standing up for those individuals who, maybe because of zoning and planning, aren't going to be able to do what they want to do? And then lastly, inspire. For those of you who have a will, you have a succession plan, then you should be telling your story. You know, I know it's a little difficult over cocktail hour. You're leaning over and say, oh, by the way, Bill, do you have your will? But you might want to start doing that, because we have to model the way. That's the point, and making sure it's getting done. And guess what? I'm done. So I guess I should ask, does anybody have any questions?
We've got some mic runners coming over.
Okay. And there you go.
Keep your hands in the air, please. I'll come to you next.
Hi, I'm over here. I was just curious what it's like getting insurance, like hurricane insurance for these properties. Like if they have trouble getting a mortgage, are they able to get that type of insurance?
I'm not sure about the hurricane insurance, but what I do know is they cannot access FEMA funds if there is a disaster. If you think back to Katrina, that was one of the greatest challenges, is people had already paid their insurance premiums. But when it was time for the insurance companies to pay out, they're like, oh, you don't own the property. But of course, they didn't ask that question as they were collecting the checks monthly to pay for the premium. But they were able to work out something.
So I'm just curious if you work with any tribes or tribal members in the South.
We don't really have a lot. I think there may be one recognized tribe in the state of South Carolina. But we do work in communities where there are Native Americans, and we are providing them the same service we're providing everyone else. I want to point out that we are not just restricted to African Americans. We will serve any heirs property owner who comes to our door. Okay.
Heirs property, I wonder, well, I just read a lot of statistics recently about the black ownership of farmland and the loss of black ownership of farmland, and probably you have some statistics on that would contextualize that issue, I think, for this crowd in a way that would be shocking.
Okay.
But can you reflect on how heirs property might also have been a way, or you're going to maybe disagree with my question. So doesn't
It's
it also
okay.
mean that some of that land that might have been sold or taken wasn't, that it protected the land, that there was so much legal complexity that it actually kept that wealth bound up in land?
Well, it depends upon to whom you're speaking, whether or not they feel that way. So to answer your question first about the statistics, after the Civil War, it was proven that African Americans owned about 15 million acres of land. At the turn of the 21st century, it's about 3 million now, and that number changes. You'll see 3, you'll see 2, you'll see 1. Definitely heirs property is one of the reasons that that land has been lost. If you think back to it, is there really weren't any attorneys for African Americans to go to. And then the ones that were there, they may not have trusted. But the Associated Press in 2000, I think it is, before the center was created, they did a series of articles called Torn from the Land. And they talked about how land was lost among African Americans. One case that sticks out to me is one person went to, an African American had purchased land, and he went to the courthouse to record his deed. And so he waited to receive a tax bill, so about a year after he recorded his deed, he went back to the courthouse, and now it was shown that that land was in the name of the person to whom he had given the deed to. So there are many different stories about how it's lost. If my lawyer were here, or one of my lawyers were here, they would tell you in some cases it's legalized theft, because people would go to an attorney to receive assistance, but they'll say, oh, you know, you really need to sell that land. Don't try to resolve the issue, just sell it. Have any of you ever visited Hilton Head Island in South Carolina? Yeah, that land was predominantly owned by African Americans. Now, I can't tell you how it was lost, but I'm saying it's not that way now.
So, over here.
Okay, yeah, please.
Hi.
I'm visually challenged, so you got to help us.
And there are a lot of us, yes. I've seen a number of cases where there was a will, and the older farmer, ranch owner, wanted to be, in most of these cases, it was usually a woman, a grandmother. She wanted to be very fair to all of her grandchildren, so she drew up a will where they all had equal shares. Lo and behold, half of them approximately want a farm, and half of them don't. They want to convert it to cash. When you're drafting wills, what do you do about the potentiality for that? What advice do you give?
So our attorneys don't like it when people do that. But once again, we allow people to make their decisions. We just tell them the ramifications of what could possibly happen if you do that. We have had people who've come in our office with the will. The only problem is they came in our office a day, because according to our state, every state's different, the will is only good up to 10 years. And people have held on to the will thinking, oh, I'm good, I'm straight. The problem is you never probated, therefore, where there might have been only one person inheriting the land, now it's going back to that scenario that you just described, where it may be all of the children. So we do allow people to make informed decisions, and we do discourage them from doing that, but we can't make them not do it.
Okay. Hi. Are you finding that community land trusts are an increasingly opportune way to deal with some of this and protect from the theft that you were just describing?
It depends. And the reason I say it depends, as long as it's the family members who are on the board of the community land trust, then I don't have a problem with it. But I do have a problem with the community land trust acquiring land, but yet the family doesn't benefit from it.
I think we have a lot of questions.
Oh, that's right.
It is 4:30, but I want to field more questions because we basically are at the end of the day. I'm going to keep passing the microphone around, and I want to also invite you to ask Kathy questions as well.
Yeah.
So please put your hands up. I'm going to keep running with the mic, but just to put both of those pieces of information out there.
Yeah, and even though I'm an only child, I promise I'm not selfish. So,
But also to let you all know that there are 2 roundtables to talk about farm transfer tomorrow and Friday morning.
yeah.
There are 2 roundtables, one tomorrow afternoon and one on Friday morning on farm transfer and family transitions. So we can do a deeper dive there. We don't have to get it all tied up today.
Thank you both so much. I have a question about whether you've seen in either tribal organizations or other collectively owned land organizations working decision models that you think do work once the land is fractionated. Have you seen any models that
You're
work?
asking, Kathy, you want to take that question, or are you? Okay.
I think either of you can answer it.
Yeah, right. So for us, once the title has been resolved, some of the families actually create limited liability corporations, in which then that's how they continue to operate it so that it does not roll back into heirs' property or fractionated land.
A question. How do the families that own these complicated land holdings manage to aggregate the taxes each year and pay the taxes?
Well, the couple of family members who are paying the tax bill probably want to know the answer to that question too. Oftentimes, there are usually only one, there are a few people who know the responsibility and they want to contribute. Sometimes it's a little old lady who's on a fixed income and she's the one who's struggling to pay the property taxes. But there is no, if the land is ever sold or if the land is divided, you can petition to be repaid for the property taxes you've paid. But, it's like through small claims court, you may never get it back. So we just see that those people are the more responsible family members.
Okay, let's give them both, Kathy and Jenny, a big round of applause. Thank you both so much.
You're welcome.